All right, hello, welcome to History Chats. The first History Chats of 2024, that's the year we're in. So today we're going to be looking back at a century to look at a very interesting time in the history of Marathon County and I guess America in general, and specifically look at how the landscape of Wausau changed over the course of the period of the 1920s. So I'm going to kick it over here to Gary, who's going to take it from here.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. As Ben said, we're looking into the 1920s. That's sort of going to be a theme throughout this year in reference to some other things, but Ben will get to that in a little bit later. But what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about downtown in the 1920s. Downtown really changed a lot in the 1920s, and we're going to be talking about that change because a lot of many buildings came into downtown in the 1920s that really significantly changed that landscape. As you may or may not know, downtown Wausau is considered an historic district because of the variety of the age and the uniqueness of a lot of the buildings in downtown Wausau. And a part of that was created in the 1920s. And we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about some of the buildings that did indeed create this unique landscape, what we call our historic downtown. So for the purposes of today, I'm going to be centering pretty much on 3rd Street, the Jefferson Street, Scott Street area. I think that is pretty much where we want to be centering on this afternoon. So, let's take a look. Let's take a look at what we have. But before we go into the 1920s, I just want to give credit to a lot of the buildings that were here already around 1900. A lot of buildings in downtown Wausau that we see today were built basically in the 1880s up through 1900. We've kept these buildings. They are still part of 3rd Street. They're still a part of our downtown. For instance, this on 3rd Street, just some other views. The old Winkleman's or the Washington Square building across the street, buildings that, like I say, go back into the 1880s. These are still a part of our downtown, and they still, like I say, make this still a part of our historic district. What I just showed you was the 300 block. If we come up 3rd Street, what we now are looking at, a partial view of the 600 block of 3rd Street. Again, a different unique style of architecture, of course, some English Tudor elements, but again, buildings that were here in the 1880s through the being built into the 1890s, And again, that retail element on the first floor, plumbers, candy shops, electrical stores, movie theaters, a variety of things, but a key part of our historic downtown. This is a shot across the 400 block to the 300 block of Scott Street. And it looks pretty familiar, doesn't it? Well, and those buildings, again, those buildings are remnants of buildings that were here certainly in the late 1890s. This is an early picture of that same block. You notice the buildings still have some elements there that are still with us today. The building on the corner, that is gone, but the other two buildings up Scott Street, they're still here and still part of our downtown. A lot of history, of course, with those buildings, but that's another story. This building on the corner was a unique YMCA building at one time, a publishing office at one time, but that has been gone from the corner of 4th and Scott Street. This is what that block looks like today. Still a part of our history. So let's talk about now. We finally get around to talking about a little bit about the 1920s, and I use this block pretty much as the center of what the 1920s did to downtown Wausau. This, of course, is the 400 block of 3rd Street, and then we'll go down the block basically. 3 of those buildings that you see today were built in the 1920s, and we'll talk about them. A couple of the other retail places were here much before that. And that block ends, of course, with the, what we now know as the Landmark Apartments, the Mint next door, and a variety of retails next to that. And of course, that hotel was eventually the Hotel Wausau. We'll talk about that in a little bit later, but that certainly dominated the landscape of Wausau for many years, and it still, of course, it still does today. But let's go down to the other end of the block. We'll talk first about the Marathon County Bank. This on the corner of 3rd and Jefferson on the west side of 3rd Street. This bank was here for a long time, one of the earlier banks in the city of Wausau. As this headline in 1925 says, the Marathon County Bank, the oldest financial institution of Wausau. Bank's great record moves into the new bank building, one of the finest buildings in the city. So it came from that granite building on the corner to this new building, this new neoclassical design building that is still here and with us today, built in 1925, and greatly adding to that corner, neoclassical, the balustrades on the rooftop, some pilasters, the attached columns, sort of giving it a neoclassical look. Again, some finer details of that building today. Next door to the bank in 1929, here's an artist's sketch of the new Mayor Lutz building coming in. This is from the Herald, as noted. So the mayor, C.B. Mayer and Carl Lutz, invested there into building this 3rd Street building. 3rd Street will get a new building, brick and concrete, Mayer Lutz building, to replace by a 4-story modern structure. And that we see today next to that corner building in the middle of the block, still with us, still 1929, still an important part, an office building today. Of course, the street level through the years have been a lot of different changes to the retail on the street level. But again, another distinguishing part of the 1920s and one of the buildings. Again, this is sort of a view of the block with the Mayor Lutz building there almost in the middle. Down on the corner, moving a little bit down 3rd Street, was at one time the Hotel Bellis. And this was a very distinguished hotel in downtown Wausau. The center really of any type of elegance in hotel living was here at the Hotel Bellis. But then in the 1920s, the Schrader chain out of Milwaukee was very interested in building a new building, building a new hotel here. So they came in the early 1920s, took over the Hotel Bellis at the corner of 3rd and Scott, and decided to build a magnificent, and the Schrader people decided to build a magnificent structure on that corner. And of course, what happened was this magnificent neoclassical designed hotel that was a mainstay, that continues to be a mainstay building in the city. But of course, for many years, it was a hotel that, with noted features, with noted people coming into the city, staying there overnight. John Kennedy, for instance, when he was campaigning for president in 1960, had a reception here as well as staying overnight. A variety of other noted people came, and this is the hotel of choice for many years, was this Hotel Wausau. Still with us, still a Landmark Apartments, but it still graces the downtown Wausau, built in the 1920s, another distinguishing feature, I think, of the 1920s here in downtown Wausau. Like I said before, formal opening of hotel, reveals many attractions. If you're old enough like me, you can somehow remember the distinguishing features, the dining room, the crystal ballroom, a lot of different features of that hotel in downtown Wausau. Again, another view of that magnificent building. Moving a little bit across the 400 block, that square, to the 400 block of 4th Street. Because there also was starting to come in the 1920s. This was the old Grand Opera House, built, I think, in the early 1900s. The place for entertainment, vaudeville, a lot of different musical entertainments, vaudeville entertainments. The Grand Opera House here in the 400 block of 4th Street. But eventually in the 1920s again, in 1927, the Grand Theater was built. Still here, still with us, providing through its history, vaudeville, movies, great movies coming here. Of course, now it's pretty much centered on the performing arts, but it's still here. A little bit of a side view, the Grand Theater centers the block. There was some infill buildings and then some other buildings on the two corners of the Grand that were here in the 1800s. But the Grand Theater itself was a testament to the 1920s, being built in 1927. Close to the Grand Theater down the street on the corner of Scott Street and Fifth Street is the Elks Club, a private fraternal organization. But again, built in designed by Obel and Oppenheimer, built in the 1920s, distinguished neoclassical design building on the corner here of Fifth Street and Scott Street. Still here, still is a big part of the history of downtown Wausau. Moving down a little bit down Fifth Street, coming to the First Presbyterian Church, their dedication service in 1927, April, a new church, the new First Presbyterian Church. This church, First Presbyterian, like I said, in 1927, across the street today from our current City Hall, but an English Tudor style with a great tower, still gracing that block of Grant Street to this very day. And in the light of the history of churches in downtown Wausau, First Presbyterian certainly does have an important part to play in that. And it was built again in the 1920s, again serving for many years this local congregation. But I can't a building that was here in the 1920s, but graced the downtown and the 400 block for many years was the courthouse built in the 1890s, torn down in the 1950s. But just think, again, I put a little bit of a plug in, just think of what that courthouse would have meant architecturally and certainly historically, if that would have been kept and still gracing downtown Wausau. But it was not, and it is gone today, now creating the 400 block park in downtown Wausau. But there's certainly enough. Take a walk around downtown Wausau. Look at some of the buildings that we featured this afternoon. You can see that the development of what it was happening in the 1920s perhaps was more significant than any other decade in downtown Wausau with regard to the establishment of buildings that would certainly last the test of time. And over these 100 years, they still are with us. They still provide great services to the city of Wausau and certainly provide a great look at the history of Wausau, especially in the last 100 years. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Gary alluded, we will probably be returning to the 1920s over the course of this upcoming year. One of the good reasons that we're doing that is because we are in the process of putting a new exhibit together. So actually, if this works here, here's a live feed from the second floor space here. So our exhibit, oh, and this is backwards for some reason, I'm realizing. Anyway, you get the idea. Our exhibit up on the second floor is coming down. The park exhibit has been here for a while, but we are making way for a new exhibit. Again, we don't have quite all of the information, the title and all that settled, but it essentially will be looking at the history of Marathon County in the 1920s and the larger story and how that all changed and maybe what it looks like in reality compared to the glamour of the idea of the flappers and all that fun stuff. So as part of that, we're going to be taking a look at some stuff here as, certainly as I help with the exhibit research and stuff like that. And why not also tie in some of the history chats for some of the stuff that may not make it into the exhibit. So to that point, Next week, we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about a specific event that happened in the 1920s. And I think really does a great job of illustrating the political situation and the changes, not necessarily to the buildings and things like that, but to the structure of our society during this period, getting out of the tumultuous years of World War I, and now we're into the 1920s. What does that actually look like in practice? So to tell a story that is the intersection of a old bandstand here, proposals for a women's bathroom, and a baseball game to support it all. So if that's interesting to you, tune in next week, and we'll be talking about that then. Yeah. In the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you next week for some more history chats.